Okay, got some I don't really care about, but might as well just get them off while I've got the opportunity, so I'm just going to do that. The very bad wizards, consequentialists, electrocuted mice experiment. So they obviously did their own thing, but this was something that just triggered my mind a little bit. People may be less inclined to electrocute the single mouse because it appears to be lonely. Well, it is lonely, obviously, and this might make sense. To add insult to injury might be more cruel, because the group of 5 mice might benefit from being in a group and recover more rapidly and fully, and have a lesser detriment to their well-being as a sum value from a consequentialist perspective. Something we don't realise about our current situation is how close to the brink we all are as individuals. Whoa, careful, Ollie. Any one of us could, in a matter of moments, have the entire value of their life stripped away by some vicious malefactor, and wouldn't have the faintest idea of how to retrieve it. I, by simply making certain accusations and manipulations through the appropriate channels, could cause you to lose your job, your eligibility of employment, or for employment, your social relationships, your monetary security, and much more. The only solutions to this are a fortification of values intrinsic to our existence itself, and a methodology for reviving oneself from such dire situations, and, obviously, a more compassionate and understanding society and society of people that want to ensure people recover from such circumstances and don't fall into them in the first place. Obviously, some formulae for recovery have existed, namely religion and the idea of salvation, but secular formulations must be devised, and there's no reason they shouldn't follow the underlying structure of the effective aspects offered by religions, minus the unsubstantiated claims of supernatural truths. As vain as it is, I have uncovered life's mysteries and now intend to live it. I shan't write of this again. If I do, I have failed myself. Twat. My emotions towards... So following my assertion that when you are arguing with someone, you are only ever trying to convince them that accepting your argument over their own would be better for them, it strikes me as indicative of certain flaws in the argumentation style often deployed in such arguments, especially in more formal debates. A useful example is that of the arguments that arise between the religiously inclined versus the less so. Often, the secular argumenter, is attempting to batter his opposition into submission with reason, but the opposition buttresses themselves in a well-guarded fort of self-righteousness and personal experience. The problem is these people value different values, and for either one of them to convince the other, they must learn to offer up the benefits that will be bestowed upon the other in the domain that the person they are arguing against values. Take, for example, the belief in an afterlife. The secular individual will undoubtedly and understandably be incredulous as to his opponent's ability, or hers, opposer's ability, to have such faith in something they have no reason to believe, because the secular individual demands reason as one of his highest values. To be in breach of reason is a heinous crime in his or her eyes, and one they wouldn't allow themselves to commit so long as they lived. The person of faith, however, believes their beliefs bring them comfort, and fear what would be left of their life should their faith be abandoned. They would much sooner sacrifice reason over what they believe to be protecting them from the depths of despair, and so they argue at one another and never with. The reasonist touts the power and importance of reason, and the faithful defends the liberty of their and that of those with similar stances to theirs happiness. If only both could realise that they must appeal to what the other deems most important, an idea of the afterlife might be able to console the rationalist if only they let it. The faithful would be so much freer if only they had the tools to discern truth from fantasy. The rationalist must realise that what they need to convince their opponent is that their happiness is not in jeopardy. The cost of reason is not one's happiness, but one's ignorance. And so too, the faithful must realise that they must convince their opponent that it is reasonable to worry about an individual's personal well-being. Obviously, the rationalist should have been got this right. Anyway, but you have to realise that they're not... The top of their pyramid isn't reason. So you have to appeal to what is at the top of their pyramid, which is their own well-being, it would seem, and which is, I actually argue is at the top of everyone's, but never mind, don't get into the semantics. And so I think an idea of God less harmful than the one we often see argued against not only exists, but might actually be useful. God as Mother Nature, the unfolding of things in the universe, or the unfolding of things in the universe, can be because Mother Nature suggests that there's some actual mother anyway, can be a helpful distillation of the complexity of all things scientific. There is no divine being, no mysterious man behind the curtain, but the baby bird must learn to. Oh, for fuck's sake! I hate when I write this. But the baby bird must learn to fly for its own sake, even if it doesn't understand why. Oh, twat! See, you knew it then. And this is what those flawed concepts of God were. Or at least I'm saying they were. Attempts to identify this strange natural progression of things, the forces of evolution and physical interactions between entities and concepts, and to have an idea of what it allowed to transpire without serious consequence to the perpetrator, was important to know for one's own interest. Similarly, what one should avoid doing was important to understand. Obviously, to believe that someone or something is physically watching you at every moment, like Father Christmas, is never going to be true, but that certain behaviours will have ramifications for you that you won't and can't consider seems obvious. Now, obviously, religion got a lot wrong, and I've said before that that only if it was prepared to adapt, it wouldn't have been so evil. Because clearly homosexuality isn't a sin. Now, before it would have been self-evident. Those who engaged in homosexual acts were doomed to a life of seclusion and ridicule, but that was the work of the religion itself, and needn't have been the case. Other things, however, are less self-imposed. Murdering your fellow man will not likely end well for you. Some aren't so clear. Adultery is okay for some, it would seem. Well, or polygamy, whatever. I would certainly err on the side of caution. And some, it simply And for some things, it simply wasn't equipped to consider. Don't stick forks in electrical sockets, for example. Don't post your passwords on Twitter. Don't pray for God to heal your child's leukemia instead of paying for chemotherapy. This is linked to Brett Weinstein's idea of metaphorical truths, but not entirely captured by it. So yeah, if that's what you're calling God, then you're giving it I'd say it's a stupid name to give it, but yep, fine. It's real, because, it's not anything supernatural. Things that aren't supernatural, right? Nature isn't supernatural. That's what makes it natural. Obviously, when a religion, such as Christianity, sets out these things which are given as being good in God's eyes, and will subsequently confer rewards onto those who adhere to its teachings, it sets up self-sustaining feedback loops. So the religion tells you adultery is wrong, partly because it is most likely not going to work out well for you, but also just because of relationships between humans and things. But also, those who commit adultery are now seen in the eyes of those adhering to the religion to be doing wrong, and so will be treated as transgressors by those people. Homosexuality experienced much the same mechanism of suppression. Not that it is equivalent to adultery. Obviously, it isn't. My brain might be much faster if I could let it. My brain might be much faster if I could get it to work in harmony with itself. As it is, the images don't match the words don't fit the sounds, and the sounds don't mean anything at all. Oh, that's just stupid. I don't really hear sounds. I guess I do a little bit, but not really. Great, that was completely not a waste of time. Okay, let's just get rid of that. Bye. Oh, earwax in my ear.